You smile at the mirror each morning, but something behind your eyes feels hollow. The performance begins before you even leave the house. "I'm fine," you tell everyone who asks. "Everything's great." But late at night, when the audience is gone and the stage lights dim, you're left with a truth you've been running from. The mask you wear to protect others from your pain has become a prison that's slowly suffocating your soul. What if I told you that this performance of happiness isn't just exhausting? It's systematically destroying who you really are. That every forced smile, every "I'm okay" when you're drowning, every moment you prioritize others' comfort over your own truth is creating a psychological fracture that runs deeper than you realize. Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps and emerged with profound insights about human suffering, understood something most people never grasp: that denying our authentic emotional experience doesn't eliminate pain, it transforms it into something far more dangerous. We become strangers to ourselves, actors who've forgotten there was ever a person beneath the performance. This isn't about occasional politeness or social courtesy. This is about the systematic betrayal of your inner world in service of an image that was never yours to begin with. And the cost: everything that makes you human. The performance begins so early you don't remember learning the script. As a child, you discovered that certain emotions were welcome and others were not. Happiness was applauded, gratitude was praised, sadness was quickly redirected, anger was shamed into silence. So you learned. You learned that love was conditional on your emotional presentation, that acceptance required editing yourself, that being good meant being convenient for others. The child who was told "don't cry" grows into an adult who can't access their grief. The teenager who was praised for being so mature becomes an adult who doesn't know how to be vulnerable. You started wearing emotional costumes without realizing they would eventually fuse to your skin. The happy mask became so comfortable that you forgot what your real face looked like underneath. But masks, no matter how beautiful, cut off circulation. They prevent the natural breathing of the soul. What happens when you spend decades performing emotions you don't feel? Your authentic self begins to atrophy. Like a muscle that's never used, your capacity for genuine feeling starts to wither. You become an expert at reading what others need from you emotionally, but you lose the ability to recognize what you actually feel. The performance becomes so automatic that you no longer know where the act ends and you begin. Frankl observed that when we deny our suffering, we don't transcend it. We become enslaved by it. The pain you refuse to acknowledge doesn't disappear. It goes underground, where it festers and spreads like an infection through every aspect of your being. Every forced smile becomes a small act of self-betrayal. Every "I'm fine" when you're breaking becomes a lie that separates you further from your own truth. The tragedy isn't that you're hurting. The tragedy is that you've been taught to believe your hurt is too much for the world to handle. So you've learned to carry it alone, in silence, while pretending it doesn't exist. But emotional suppression is like holding your breath underwater. Eventually, something has to give. Your brain wasn't designed for constant emotional deception. When you consistently suppress authentic feelings while performing fake ones, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways in ways that fragment your sense of self. Daniel Siegel's research on emotional regulation reveals something disturbing. Chronic emotional suppression doesn't just hide feelings, it disrupts the very capacity to feel. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for emotional awareness, begins to disconnect from the limbic system where feelings originate. You develop what researchers call alexithymia, the inability to identify and describe emotions. It's not that you don't have feelings, it's that the bridge between feeling and conscious awareness has been systematically destroyed by years of performance. Consider what happens in your body when you force a smile while feeling devastated. Your facial muscles contract in the pattern of happiness while your nervous system remains in a state of distress. This contradiction creates what psychologists call emotional dissonance. a split between what you're expressing and what you're experiencing. Your body keeps the score, even when your mind tries to edit the story. The stress hormones that accompany suppressed emotions don't magically disappear because you're pretending to be happy. Cortisol continues flooding your system, your heart rate remains elevated, your immune function becomes compromised. The body cannot be lied to, even when you've become an expert at lying to everyone else. Over time, this constant state of internal conflict exhausts your nervous system. You develop what appears to be depression, but it's actually something more insidious, a profound disconnection from your own emotional reality. You're not sad, you're emotionally amputated. The part of you that could feel has been systematically severed from the part that shows up in the world. What's particularly devastating is how this neurological rewiring affects your decision-making capacity. Emotions aren't just feelings, they're crucial data that help you navigate complex situations. When you lose access to this emotional information, you begin making choices based on what you think you should feel rather than what you actually feel. You choose careers that look good on paper but drain your soul. You enter relationships that make logical sense but leave you emotionally empty. The brain's attempt to reconcile this constant emotional dishonesty creates what neuroscientists call cognitive load, the mental effort required to maintain contradictory states. You're essentially running two operating systems simultaneously: the authentic emotional system trying to process real experiences, and the performance system trying to maintain the facade. This dual processing exhausts cognitive resources that should be available for creativity, problem-solving, and genuine connection. Siegel's work shows that this disconnection doesn't just affect your emotional life, it impacts your ability to make decisions, form relationships, and navigate the world. When you lose access to your emotional wisdom, you lose your internal compass. You become dependent on external validation because you can no longer trust your own inner guidance. The very system designed to help you understand yourself becomes the enemy you're constantly fighting against. Society has created an elaborate system of emotional rules that most people follow without question. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability reveals how we've built a culture that demands emotional labor from everyone, especially from those who are suffering. We're expected to manage not only our own feelings, but everyone else's comfort level with those feelings. You learn early that your sadness makes others uncomfortable, your anger threatens their sense of safety, your anxiety disrupts their peace. So you begin to edit yourself, not for your own well-being, but to maintain others' emotional equilibrium. Your pain becomes a problem to be solved rather than an experience to be honored. This emotional labor is particularly crushing for those who are naturally empathetic. You become so attuned to others' emotional needs that you forget you have any of your own. You develop a hypervigilance around others' comfort while becoming completely numb to your own distress. The caretaker becomes the forgotten patient. What's particularly insidious is how this emotional performance gets labeled as virtue. Being strong means never showing weakness. Being mature means never needing support. Being selfless means never acknowledging your own needs. The very qualities that destroy your authentic self are praised and rewarded by a system that benefits from your emotional silence. Brown discovered that this culture of emotional perfectionism creates what she calls shame resilience, but in reverse. Instead of building resilience against shame, we become more vulnerable to it because we've lost touch with our core selves. When you don't know who you are beneath the performance, any criticism feels like an existential threat. The tragedy is that in trying to be what everyone needs, you become someone no one, including yourself, can truly know. Your relationships become performances where intimacy is impossible because there's no authentic self present to be intimate with. You're surrounded by people who love your mask, while your real face suffocates beneath it. Here's where the destruction deepens beyond your own psyche. you become addicted to managing others' emotional responses to your existence. Gabor Mate's work on addiction reveals that we can become just as dependent on emotional avoidance as we can on substances. The high comes from seeing others comfortable with your presence, even when that comfort requires your complete self-erasure. You learn to read micro-expressions like a survival skill, the slight tension in someone's face when you mention being tired, the way conversations shift when you hint at struggling, the subtle withdrawal when you're anything less than optimally functional, the forced brightness in their voice when they change the subject away from your pain. These responses train you to edit yourself in real time, cutting away any part of your experience that might disturb their equilibrium. This creates a feedback loop that's incredibly difficult to break. Every time you perform happiness and receive positive responses, your brain reinforces the pattern. You get a hit of approval, validation, acceptance. The smile feels warmer when you hide your sadness. The conversation flows better when you suppress your anger. The relationship feels safer when you minimize your needs. But like any addiction, the tolerance builds. You need to perform more convincingly, more consistently, with less and less space for authentic moments. The most insidious part is how this gets framed as consideration for others. You tell yourself you're being kind by hiding your pain. You convince yourself that your emotional honesty would burden others. You rationalize your self-suppression as protecting those you love from your negativity. But what you're really doing is robbing both yourself and others of genuine connection. You're offering them a relationship with a character you've created rather than a human being you actually are. Consider how this plays out in your closest relationships. You become the person others come to when they need emotional support, but you never allow the reverse. You listen to their problems, but never share your own. You offer comfort, but never ask for it. You become the emotional fortress, strong, reliable, unshakable, while slowly crumbling from the inside. Your loved ones begin to see you as someone who doesn't need care, who doesn't struggle, who somehow exists above the messy reality of human emotion. Mate points out that addiction always involves a disconnection from the self. When you're addicted to others' comfort, you lose the ability to prioritize your own emotional health. Your internal compass becomes so focused on external reactions that you can no longer navigate by your own true north. You become a satellite orbiting others' needs, while your own center slowly dies. Your decisions are made based on what will maintain others' equilibrium rather than what serves your authentic well-being. The withdrawal from this addiction is brutal. When you begin to show authentic emotions, the people who benefited from your performance often react with confusion, frustration, or rejection. They preferred the version of you that never required anything from them. This reaction feels like proof that your authentic self is indeed too much, driving you back into the familiar prison of emotional performance. The temporary discomfort others feel when confronted with your humanity becomes evidence in your mind that you should return to the safety of the mask. But here's what Mate discovered. The people who truly love you want to know the real you, including your struggles. Those who reject your authenticity were never really in relationship with you. They were in relationship with your function. The addiction to their comfort was actually an addiction to being used, to being valued for what you provided rather than who you were. Comfortable with your presence, even when that comfort requires your complete self-erasure. You learn to read micro-expressions like a survival skill, the slight tension in someone's face when you mention being tired, the way conversations shift when you hint at struggling, the subtle withdrawal when you're anything less than optimally functional. These responses train you to edit yourself in real time, cutting away any part of your experience that might disturb their equilibrium. This creates a feedback loop that's incredibly difficult to break. Every time you perform happiness and receive positive responses, your brain reinforces the pattern. You get a hit of approval, validation, acceptance. But like any addiction, the tolerance builds. You need to perform more convincingly, more consistently, with less and less space for authentic moments. The most insidious part is how this gets framed as consideration for others. You tell yourself you're being kind by hiding your pain. You convince yourself that your emotional honesty would burden others. But what you're really doing is robbing both yourself and others of genuine connection. You're offering them a relationship with a character you've created rather than a human being you actually are. Mate points out that addiction always involves a disconnection from the self. When you're addicted to others' comfort, you lose the ability to prioritize your own emotional health. Your internal compass becomes so focused on external reactions that you can no longer navigate by your own true north. You become a satellite orbiting others' needs while your own center slowly dies. The withdrawal from this addiction is brutal. When you begin to show authentic emotions, the people who benefited from your performance often react with confusion, frustration, or rejection. They preferred the version of you that never required anything from them. This reaction feels like proof that your authentic self is indeed too much, driving you back into the familiar prison of emotional performance. The cruelest irony of emotional performance is that in trying to be lovable, you make yourself incapable of being truly loved. When you consistently present a curated version of yourself, any affection you receive feels hollow because it's directed at a character you're playing rather than a person you are. Sue Johnson's work on attachment theory reveals something devastating about emotional hiding. It doesn't protect relationships. It slowly suffocates them. When you refuse to show vulnerability, you force others to connect with a surface that has no depth. They may like your performance, but they can't love what they're not allowed to see. Real intimacy requires what researchers call emotional co-regulation, the ability to be authentic about your internal state while remaining present for another person's experience. But when you're constantly performing, you're neither authentic nor truly present. You're managing an image which requires all your attention and energy. There's nothing left for genuine connection. Consider what happens in your closest relationships when you're always fine. Others stop asking how you're really doing because they've learned your answer is predetermined. They stop offering support because you've taught them you don't need any. They stop sharing their own struggles because emotional reciprocity requires mutual vulnerability, and you've made yourself emotionally unavailable. Johnson discovered that people in your life begin to feel like they're in a relationship with a ghost, someone who's physically present but emotionally absent. They may not be able to articulate what's missing, but they feel the distance. They sense the performance. And deep down, they know they're not connecting with your real self because you're not offering it. The most heartbreaking part is that the love you do receive feels empty because you know it's conditional on your performance. You become terrified that if people saw your actual struggles, your real fears, your genuine emotions, they would withdraw their affection. So you become trapped in a prison of your own making, loved for who you pretend to be while dying from the loneliness of who you actually are. If this is hitting something deep inside you, if you're recognizing the cost of your emotional performance, subscribe now, because what's coming next will show you exactly how this constant masking is destroying not just your relationships, but your physical body itself. Your body becomes the final battlefield where the war between authentic feeling and emotional performance plays out. Bessel van der Kolk's groundbreaking research on trauma shows that when the mind creates disconnection from emotional truth, the body holds the burden of that split. Every suppressed feeling has to go somewhere, and usually it goes into your muscles, your organs, your nervous system. Chronic happiness performance creates what van der Kolk calls developmental trauma, not from a single terrible event, but from the ongoing betrayal of your own emotional reality. Your body remains in a constant state of hypervigilance, always scanning for emotional threats, always prepared to perform rather than feel. The fatigue you experience isn't just from working hard or sleeping poorly. It's from the exhausting effort of maintaining emotional lies. Your muscles stay tense from holding expressions that don't match your internal state. Your digestive system struggles because stress hormones from suppressed emotions interfere with basic biological functions. Your immune system weakens because the energy meant for healing is redirected toward emotional management. Many people who've spent years performing happiness develop mysterious physical symptoms that doctors struggle to diagnose. Chronic pain without clear cause, digestive issues that don't respond to treatment, autoimmune conditions that seem to appear from nowhere. Van der Kolk's research suggests these aren't separate from emotional suppression. They're direct consequences of it. Your body is trying to communicate what your mind refuses to acknowledge. The tension in your shoulders is holding the weight of unexpressed grief. The knot in your stomach is your fear that you're not allowed to be human. The headaches are your brain's protest against the constant effort of emotional editing. The most tragic part is that you often interpret these physical symptoms as further evidence that something is wrong with you, rather than recognizing them as your body's desperate attempt to restore honesty to your emotional life. You seek medical solutions for what is fundamentally an emotional problem, the systematic denial of your own human experience. Van der Kolk's work shows that healing these physical manifestations requires reconnecting with suppressed emotions, not further avoiding them. The path to physical health runs directly through emotional authenticity. Your body won't stop rebelling until your mind stops lying. Breaking free from the prison of emotional performance isn't about suddenly becoming completely unfiltered or dumping your feelings on everyone around you. It's about gradually reclaiming your right to have an authentic internal experience, regardless of how others respond to it. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion shows that healing begins when you stop treating your emotions as problems to be solved and start treating them as information to be honored. The first step is recognizing that your feelings, all of them, are valid responses to your human experience. Sadness isn't a character flaw. Anger isn't a moral failing. Anxiety isn't evidence of weakness. These emotions are data about your internal state and your relationship with the world. When you suppress them, you're essentially cutting yourself off from crucial information about your own well-being. Neff discovered that people who practice self-compassion, treating themselves with the same kindness they'd offer a good friend, actually become more emotionally resilient, not less. The fear that acknowledging your struggles will make you weaker is exactly backwards. Emotional honesty builds strength. Performance creates fragility. When you allow yourself to feel difficult emotions without judgment, you develop the capacity to move through them rather than being trapped by them. Start small. Notice when you automatically say, "I'm fine," and pause. Ask yourself, am I actually fine, or am I just performing fine? You don't have to change your response immediately, but begin developing awareness of the gap between your internal reality and your external presentation. This awareness alone begins to heal the split that performance has created. The next step is practicing what Kristin Neff calls emotional granularity, developing a more nuanced vocabulary for your internal states. Instead of fine or good, try identifying specific emotions. Are you tired, overwhelmed, disappointed, relieved, frustrated, excited but nervous? The more precisely you can name what you're experiencing, the more you reclaim your emotional territory from the generic performance of happiness. Understanding the difference between healthy emotional regulation and suppression is crucial. Regulation means feeling your emotions while choosing how to express them. Suppression means pretending the emotions don't exist. One builds emotional intelligence, the other destroys it. You can feel angry without lashing out. You can acknowledge sadness without wallowing. You can experience fear without being paralyzed by it. Finally, begin experimenting with small moments of emotional honesty. When someone asks how you are, try saying, "I'm having a rough day," or "I'm feeling overwhelmed," and notice what happens. Most of the catastrophic responses you fear rarely materialize. Instead, you often discover that honesty invites connection rather than rejection. People appreciate authenticity more than we think. They're just as tired of superficial interactions as you are. Create safe spaces for emotional authenticity. This might mean finding a therapist, joining a support group, or simply identifying one trusted friend with whom you can practice being real. The goal isn't to perform emotional authenticity for others' approval. It's to reconnect with your own emotional truth, because you deserve to live as a whole person rather than a carefully curated image. The mask of happiness you've been wearing wasn't created to protect you. It was created to protect others from having to deal with your humanity. And in serving their comfort, you've sacrificed your own soul. Every forced smile has been a small death. Every "I'm fine" when you're drowning has been a betrayal of your own truth. But here's what Viktor Frankl knew, what Daniel Siegel's research confirms, what Brené Brown's work reveals. Your authentic self, the one that feels deeply, struggles genuinely, and experiences the full spectrum of human emotion, is not too much. It's not a burden. It's not something that needs to be hidden or fixed or performed away. Your real feelings, your actual struggles, your genuine fears and hopes and dreams are the raw material of connection. They're what makes you human. They're what makes you lovable, not in spite of your imperfections, but because of your wholeness. The cracks in your facade aren't flaws to be hidden. They're where the light gets in, where real connection becomes possible. Think about the people you most admire, the ones you feel closest to. It's not their perfection that draws you to them, it's their humanity, their willingness to be real, to admit their struggles, to show their fears alongside their strengths. You've been working so hard to be impressive that you've forgotten how to be human. And in that effort to be perfect, you've become invisible. The performance of happiness has stolen years from you. It's cost you relationships where you could have been truly known. It's robbed you of the intimacy that comes from being accepted for who you actually are, rather than praised for who you pretend to be. You've been giving people access to a character while your real self has been dying of loneliness. But it's not too late. Your authentic self has been waiting beneath the mask, patient and persistent, ready to breathe again, ready to feel again, ready to be seen again. The person you really are, the one with fears and hopes, struggles and dreams, pain and joy, that person is worthy of love. That person deserves to exist in the world without apology. The world doesn't need your performance. It needs your presence. It needs the full, complex, beautifully human truth of who you are. And so do you. You deserve to live as yourself, not as what others need you to be. You deserve relationships based on who you are, not what you provide. You deserve to feel your feelings without judgment, to struggle without shame, to be human without apology. The journey back to yourself won't be easy. You'll face resistance from others who preferred the performed version of you. You'll battle internal voices that tell you your authentic self is too much, too difficult, too needy. But every step toward emotional honesty is a step toward freedom. Every moment of authentic feeling is a rebellion against a system that profits from your emotional silence. If this resonated with something deep inside you, if you recognized yourself in these patterns of emotional hiding, then you need to understand this. What we've covered today is only the beginning. Because once you start seeing through the performance, once you begin to recognize how deeply this programming runs, you'll discover something even more unsettling. The people closest to you, the ones who claim to love you, may be the very ones most invested in keeping your mask in place. They've built their comfort around your performance. And when you start to change, when you begin showing up authentically, their resistance can be more brutal than you ever imagined. In the next video, we'll expose the dark psychology of how others use your emotional suppression to control you, how they weaponize your need to be strong against your own well-being, and why the moment you start honoring your authentic emotions, certain people in your life will reveal their true nature. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about the entire system of emotional manipulation that keeps you trapped. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. The mask is just the beginning. The real war starts when you try to take it off. If this journey towards psychological freedom matters to you, if you want to keep uncovering these hidden truths that most people will never see, subscribe and support this channel. Content like this level of depth, these insights that challenge everything you've been taught, doesn't exist without your support. Together, we're building something rare, a place where truth matters more than comfort.